We don't know for sure who the president will pick tomorrow. All attention seems to be centered on Amy Coney Barrett, the 48-year-old judge who sits on the 7th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, she was a runner-up, if you will, to Brett Kavanaugh, who was the president's ultimate choice. Of course, he did get in. It was a very, divisive nomination fight, and the indications are this will be as well if it ends up being Barrett because of religion. She's a Catholic. Came into full focus, especially with some comments that Democratic lawmakers were making at the time. I remember Senator Dianne Feinstein saying in almost Yoda-like terms, the dogma lives loudly within you. How do you answer that when you're charged with a dogma that lives within you? She fully owned up to her Catholicism, but said that it would not influence her voting and her decisions on the high court. Siraj Hashmi joins us right now, the Washington Examiner, a commentary writer, much, much more. Regardless, Siraj, this is going to get nasty, isn't it?
Absolutely, Neil. The problem is religion usually wasn't really the focal point for many Supreme Court nominees. And for Amy Coney Barrett, who is a devout Catholic, I mean, you said it, the Dianne Feinstein dogma comment, that still resonates 3 years later after her nomination to the Court of Appeals. It's going to be interesting because do you apply that standard to other nominees in the future? And if you happen to diversify the Supreme Court to extend to the Islamic faith, where Sharia law is a concern for a lot of Americans, does that come up? Is that in the line of bigotry? We're about to find out.
Also, it's a dogma issue if you're pro-life. It doesn't seem to be a dogma issue to some of these questioners if you're pro-choice. I'm just wondering if this will simply go along party lines. Ever since Mitt Romney indicated he was open to a confirmation process, didn't necessarily say he would support the president's choice, but open to a confirmation process. Right now, the thinking seems to be that along party lines, largely, they will be able to sneak in a Supreme Court pick. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. There can be along party lines, so long as Mitch McConnell is able to get those votes. I don't see any reason why even Mike Pence would step in and cast the deciding vote. But just a little bit more on the Catholic faith of Amy Coney Barrett. I mean, it's a slippery slope, and I think there's a way for Democrats to actually navigate these waters and making an opposition to Amy Coney Barrett without making it about her Catholic faith. There has been some, rumblings and grumblings on Twitter, for example, about Barrett's faith. But from mainstream Senate Democrats, you haven't really seen nearly as much opposition to her faith. But again, there is concern for Americans that her faith could inspire her to interpret the Constitution differently. But her mentor was Antonin Scalia. She clerked for him, and he was a devout Catholic as well, and an originalist and a textualist. So if Barrett ends up being nominated, she would be. A lot of people are arguing she is the female version of Scalia.
Interesting. Siraj, another thing I've heard is that I know Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine, didn't want this process to begin now. But they would obviously vote when all is said and done, right? So what do we know about what they plan to do? I know they wanted to presumably opt out of this process. It makes a big difference with Susan Collins because I believe she sits on the Judiciary Committee. But what will their role be? And will they vote yay or nay when this process is done, even though they don't want that process happening now?
I can see, Neil, that there will be a swing vote, whether it be a moderate Democrat like Joe Manchin, for example, who ran in 2018 for his midterm election. Susan Collins sort of fell on the sword voting for Kavanaugh, while Joe Manchin can then vote for Kavanaugh as well and be able to retain a seat. I could see sort of the flip of that, where Joe Manchin announces he's voting for President Trump's Supreme Court nominee and giving cover for Susan Collins so that he takes basically most of the fire.
What about Doug Jones in Alabama, who won that Alabama contest? It was an odd event and like a supernova event. But Alabama's a very, very conservative state. I just wonder, could he tip to the president's pick?
I think when it comes to gaining the Senate for Democrats, I believe, and just my instinct on this is that Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer would probably give Doug Jones permission to vote for Amy Coney Barrett or any other, or whether Barbara Lagoa or Allison Jones Rushing, whoever President Trump nominates, in order to keep his seat, because the agenda of Senate Democrats, they have this bold agenda talking about court packing and possibly abolishing the filibuster. And if Doug Jones loses his seat, there's a good chance they'll stay in the minority.
Real quickly, and Amy Coney Barrett, one of the other reasons I've heard why she is being considered is she's been thoroughly vetted. And for her appeals court appointment, I mean, that, of course, was the famous exchange with Dianne Feinstein. So what we know, we know. There'd be very few surprises. And the administration wants to make this as quick a process as possible. Is that influencing the president on his ultimate choice?
That should influence the president's choice. If you have a candidate who has not been vetted and you're giving Democrats in the opposition a reason to call for more hearings and delay the process, I mean, we're around 40 days to the election. Republicans want to see this pushed through as fast as quickly as possible. And you have a few decisions that I'm sure will be questioned. Barrett's opinion on campus sexual assault and the allowing defendants to sue campuses over their handling of the cases certainly will be coming into question. But there is at least hope for some police reform advocates and libertarians, civil libertarians, who talk about her role, her opinion on qualified immunity, and that there was basically a detective who wasn't eligible for it because they falsified information to get an arrest warrant. So Barrett has sort of at least a few libertarian positions as well as conservative ones. But, she might be the most popular pick out of all of them.
All right, we shall see. We'll know tomorrow. Siraj Hashmi, thank you very much. Washington Examiner commentary writer.